Hey guys, today we're gonna be doing another recommendation by the worst channel you have ever seen. And basically, this is gonna be what if Joseph had become the ultimate life form instead of cars? Of course. So, basically, this is either on accident or, you know, however, whatever antics that Joseph uses to get the mask in this version, because we know that's what Joseph's all about. So, Joseph gets the mask. He defeats Cars relatively easily, I assume. But this means that he never ends up getting his hand chopped off, and because of that, he's not recovering with Suzy Q. And if he's not recovering with Suzy Q, they may never end up getting married. Now, this is some pretty bad news for the future because no Holly, since if Joseph and Suzy Q aren't together, then they don't have Holly. If Holly's not there, then you don't get Joseph. Jotaro. You don't get Jotaro. You don't get Jolene. So it's a pretty big difference. Although let's just say, for the sake of this story, they do still end up getting married. It's just in a slightly different circumstance. And now onwards to part three. That's about all that's different for part two, I assume. But yeah, for part three, we have a younger looking, more powerful Joseph, which would help out a whole lot during the story of Stardust Crusaders. Because, well, let's just say nobody dies. Well, in terms of the actual Crusaders themselves, most likely, let's say that Abdul, Iggy, Kakyoin, all of them survive. Now, you may ask, how does that happen? Well, basically, due to the power ramp and intelligence increase, because the Ultimate Life Form has a massive IQ, and that's on top of Joseph's already crazy, weird intelligence that he had since the start. So, we have this whole scenario where Joseph probably saves Abdul from Vanilla Ice, and he finds out what Zawarudo is all about before Kakyoin even does, most likely, because of this intelligence amp. And as a result, well, and Iggy probably survives as well, as a side note. As a result, they probably end up defeating Dio a bit earlier. Most likely no Weird Al Yankovic reference, but that's okay, I guess. That could still happen, I guess, at some point, but it would be a bit different. Um, since Joseph doesn't almost die, or like die and come back to life in this version of the story. But yeah, anyways, onwards to part 4. And basically, Joseph, Kakyoin, and Abdul, I think they all show up at about the same time. Most likely during the time when Joseph appeared in canon. But Joseph is no longer a senile old man in part 4. So he's actually able to participate in most of the story, in the fights and everything. He can fight side by side with his son. Father and son duo could be really cool. Um, since we've never seen that exact relationship in JoJo's in terms of a fight. We've seen father and daughter with Jotaro and Jolene, but never father and son. So at least not to my memory. So yeah, um, we get to see that, and the invisible baby and all that stuff that probably still happens. But we get to see more cool interactions with Joseph and Josuke, who I assume is a bit less weirded out by seeing his father for the first time, since he's not a senile old man this time around. So now we can move on to part 5, since I feel like part four's end result would be mostly similar. Um, Maybe some of the characters from that died don't die, um, or maybe they still do. But anyways, in part 5, we could see either it stays the same, or we could have Joseph go either with Koichi or instead of Koichi. And this means that Giorno actually gets to meet his nephew, technically, and gets to spend time with his family, which he doesn't really get to do in canon. And that's pretty cool because we get to see Giorno learn about his past and about his family and the whole story with Dio and everything through the eyes or through the words of someone who actually experienced it this time around, being Joseph. And I think that's gonna be a pretty cool thing that they do for this. I think it would be real cool for the story. Maybe some of the characters that ended up dying in part 5 don't end up dying. So Bucciarati, Abacchio, Narancia, they might even survive. And here's another side like thing that could happen with this is Polnareff might never end up getting crippled in the first place. You might ask, how does that happen? So instead of Polnareff going alone to deal with the whole Diablo situation before part 5 takes place, we could have him go with Joseph, or Joseph goes alone and he ends up killing Diablo. And this means that aside from Polnareff never getting crippled, Diablo's dead, so part 5 in itself is a whole lot different than it would have been in canon. Um, Bucciarati probably becomes like a high-ranking member of the mafia earlier on, and with a higher rank, he might become in charge of the whole thing. He might take charge of everything, basically taking Diablo's spot eventually, that he's now left open since he's dead. And what else could happen is that Giorno may never become a gang star, I guess you could say, or he might still become one, but I say he might never become one because of Joseph's influence. So he could try and steer him into a different direction, or he doesn't and he just lets him become a gang star or whatever. So yeah, that's it for part 5. I think those are all the major changes. Maybe Fugo doesn't even leave because of Joseph being there, because he's just Joseph. Or he still does leave. Whatever. So that's it for part 5. Now on to part 6. So with part 6, Joseph, I think he's had a great run, but he's probably gonna die at the end of part 6. Either the Sea Moon or Made in Heaven. But Joseph's death means that the people who have survived or are closer to him in this version of the timeline, like Jolene, Kakyoin, and Abdul, are probably all there. And even if Kakyoin and Abdul aren't there, then Jolene and Jotaro would probably get a strong enough rage amp to take down Pucci. And if they take down Pucci, that means no reset universe. So it's probably the end of the story as a whole. That's the end of JoJo's. It would end with part 6. At least the original timeline, and then you can still technically have the new universe with part 7, 8, and 9, especially because I do quite like part 7 a lot. So that's it, basically, for this What If. So yeah, thanks again for the great video idea, the worst channel you have ever seen, and yeah, thanks for listening, guys. I hope I did it justice. And yeah, bye, guys.